This is Tony from Freedom at the Crossroads, helping women everywhere look better, feel better without the pressure of OPE, other people's expectations. Welcome, my undomesticated sisters. Grab a latte, some snacks, and a chair because we have a lot to talk about in honor of Juneteenth, June 19th, the day that all enslaved peoples of African descent were set free, Juneteenth, 1865. Well, ladies, today is a special day for women of my lineage and also for women and peoples of African descent, period. Given the current climate, what's been going on, yes, we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, but we're also in the midst of a powerful movement for civil rights and social justice that was sparked once again by the murder of a African-American man here in the U.S., George Floyd, but his was merely the match that set fire to all of this once again. A number of us have discussed and talked about how until this country is willing to have those difficult questions and really heal the wounds of slavery and discrimination in this country, this will continue to be a cancer in American society. But this is something that is not, germane just to the U.S. There are other parts of the world that are in concert and in solidarity with us here in the U.S. because they recognize that this is something that people of color throughout the world are fighting against in one way or another, some more overt than others, some more subtle. And everyone, with the reset of COVID-19, the actual forcing of all of us to sit down and take stock of our situation and say, hey, where are we going from now as a planet, as a people, as a group called humanity? We have some work to do. So what does that mean in the context of self-care, particularly for women of color, particularly for African-American women, who this is hitting hard from the get-go? For years, we've had to navigate a difficult space of discrimination and structural racism here in the U.S. This is true also of British Africans have had to go through similar issues. They still continue to, deal with these same issues as well. And the question becomes, well, how do you navigate that within the context of self-care? In other words, how do you maintain and strive and focus on self-care in the midst of such a difficult and daily trauma, really? Because being subjected to inequality, being subjected to discriminatory practices, particularly in law enforcement and other agencies within the country, within the nation, within society, that takes a toll mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So how do you, having those issues in place, how do you maintain self-care? How do you achieve self-care to the degree that you are able to continually build resilience? Remember, ladies, I mentioned resilience several months ago, actually. I articulated it in January, but this is something that I had been leading up to back in December. And I had talked about how, something powerful, something transformational is going to happen in 2020. I felt that there was some kind of powerful force at work, in preparation for a new year. And lo and behold, COVID-19 came. But then this seething mass of wounds and outcries and uproar and uprising and activism in different pockets, percolating beneath the surface of not just American society, but globally. Wherever there were people being disenfranchised, particularly people of color, wherever people were having to deal with structural discriminatory practices within their own cultures, within their own parts of the world, in terms of gender equity, in terms of, sexuality, in terms of all of these things, all these populations of people that have been marginalized, discriminated, and classified as other, and because of that classification have been treated less than, dominant society or what accepted, quote unquote, society looks like. And they've had to struggle and navigate and live in the midst of all of that. All of these things set the stage for self-care and also resilience. Because if you want to be resilient, if you want to thrive and have joy and live and not just be inundated and feeling like you're hopeless, feeling like there's no way forward, feeling like a hamster on that wheel spinning, going nowhere, you must self-care. And this is why as well, I remember several months ago when I first started, actually, when I reactivated my podcast, because there was a period of time where I was trying to retool some things and reimagine and refocus this platform for us women. When I created, when I created the Undomesticated Woman podcast series, and I've always had this space for women because certain things have happened in my past, within my own lineage, that have impassioned me to fight for women's self-care, to fight for women's empowerment through the pathway of self-care. And when you add the dimension of discrimination and inequality in any way, any kind of social injustice, or, and disenfranchisement, self-care becomes even more important, and it plays a larger role in terms of not just enabling us to survive that, but giving us the capacity to be resilient so that we can navigate those spaces, but in the midst of navigating those spaces, find creative ways that are useful and effective for mitigating those circumstances, for changing that state. Resilience is about growth. It is about empowerment. And it is about activism. And I feel like that is why self-care is such a active thing. Because it has so much overlap in resilience. Resilience relies on self-care, and self-care relies on resilience. And so as a woman of color, as women of color, as a woman reconnecting with her tradition, with her ancestors, all of us connecting with our ancestors and with each other and community, the importance of what activism can create and how it can transform lives echoes and calls us in the same way within self-care. I've said it a number of times that self-care is more than just working out and eating healthy, or, all these images you see in various, media of, happy-go-lucky people all fit and taut and doing, yoga and smoothie bowls. No. The down and dirty of self-care is activism. And I spoke of this a while ago when I talked about the connection and the roots of self-care years ago. And, it came about during the same time as the civil rights movement. All of that was overlapping with the women's rights movements. All of these have the same roots: activism and empowerment. And so Juneteenth for me, and what it should be for all of us, and the message it should sound for all of us, is that we can effect change in our lives, in our society, within ourselves, and externally in our environment. We can change the world, but you must act. ACT, activism. There is nothing passive about self-care. And in some instances, self-care is a radical movement. It's a radical movement because it requires transformation, breaking of states and status quos, and breaking the wheel, that hamster wheel. So, Juneteenth, when I think of that, in the context of self-care, I think power. And I think powerful force of activism and movement that transforms, it enables, empowers, uplifts, and impacts across all spaces. And that is the power to me of self-care. And it does something on the inside of us when you place this date, this powerful date that many of us are just coming to realize. For those of us in the African American community and the African diaspora, Juneteenth is a day that we all know. This is nothing new. However, against the backdrop of the uprising and the movements sparked by the murder of George Floyd, everybody wants to get on that train. Everybody now is finally willing to have that discussion. And it's all pouring out because the carpet that all this was buried underneath, all the distractions that covered this, and all the lies and bandages we placed on top of these issues, these seething issues, has been ripped off in the wake of COVID-19. So we're all naked and raw and having to deal with this and having to have those discussions finally. But that is the nature of healing anyway. You can't heal a wound if you don't first reveal it, lance it, open it up, cleanse it, apply medication, and heal it. And it's sad, but then, at the same time, we all feel hopeful because we feel the wind of change. But it's sad that it took so many centuries for this nation to reach this point and for the world to reach this point. Because not only are we having this conversation about disempowerment, disenfranchisement of Native peoples, of African peoples, of people of African descent, speaking to the issue of slavery and how people were stripped and stolen and murdered and traumatized generation after generation simply because of the color of their skin and their otherness. We are finally having that discussion. But that discussion has consequences too, and it forces us to go into all those uncomfortable places that are connected to this. The structural racism, the discriminatory practices, the gender inequality, the discrimination based on sexual orientation, any kind of otherness that does not meet some status quo or some dominant culture's ideas and models of what a worthy member should aspire to or be seen to be or perceived to be. And so self-care energizes, it empowers, it's activism. Now, for today, how do you do that? Okay, in the midst of, we know what's going on, there hardly a day goes by where there's not some other fire of unrest that is sparked by another incident. In the part of the U.S. here, we are dealing with issues of suddenly we're seeing instances of young men that have mysteriously been found hanging dead from trees. And the local police are claiming that it's suicide. And all of us in the African community and the Black community are saying, no. That's not looking right. We remember this. Because anybody who does not remember their history is doomed to repeat it. And that's true for any cultural group as well as any nation. And the U.S. has been wantonly, but not just the U.S., Britain too, the British Empire, wantonly forgetting, quote unquote, their history of enslavement of other people and the consequences of those actions and the reparations that have yet to be meted out to the descendants of those people that were used and abused, and to continue to, deal with those issues. But again, back to self-care. Self-care in that context becomes a powerful tool for healing, self-healing, even as you seek to achieve transformation external to yourself, i.e., dismantle structural, do your part to dismantle structural racism, gender inequity, address civil rights issues. And it's not just civil rights issues as it applies to people of color, but also other populations and segments of society that have been disenfranchised and discriminated against for whatever reason, be it religion, sexual orientation, whatever you want to call it. Because at the end of the day, Juneteenth reminds us all that we are human, and every human being is due basic human dignity. And that means civil rights, human rights. We are all entitled to that. It is not something we earn. It is our birthright. And self-care enables you to not just heal those wounds internally and give you the necessary resilience to effect the changes you want to achieve going forward, but self-care also allows you to gain perspective. What can you do to self-care in the spirit of Juneteenth, in the spirit of the transformational processes that are ongoing now? Some are gut-wrenching, some are heart-wrenching, some are emotional. I know for me it's been a very emotional and, very, uncomfortable. But even as I acknowledge that discomfort and I acknowledge that angst and pain and all of that, because of the power of self-care, and my practice of self-care. And that's not to say my practice of self-care is perfect. There is no such thing as perfection in any capacity. The universe is imperfect. How much more me, one single atom of the universe? But self-care gives me flexibility, plasticity in mind, body, soul, so that I am able to navigate difficult spaces. And that is the power of self-care, because it draws on the foundational elements of resilience. And resilience and self-care, they're intertwined. And so the question becomes, okay, how do you self-care right now? Well, here's one way to do it. One way to self-care, radically take action for self-care, is to invest in yourself in terms of personal development. And that's not to say go, do some, expensive activity or what have you, but no, do some reading and critical thinking, journal. Get in touch with yourself, because, part of the problem that we've all been, that's been playing into this whole festering too of this atmosphere that we're in right now is that we allow ourselves to become distracted by obligations, other people's expectations. That's why I speak on the issue of domestication of women. That's another issue I've talked about before, and I'll talk about it at a later date once we get back into the groove. But staying on point with Juneteenth. When you want to hold space for yourself, when you make space for yourself, when you invest in yourself, and that's what you're doing. You're making space for yourself. You're allowing yourself to acknowledge that you have worth as a human being. Forget the fact that you're a woman. You're first and foremost a human being. And when you make space for yourself, you are acknowledging, you are connecting with self and the fact that on a spiritual deep level you have worth. And out of that sense of self-worth is birthed self-care, developing self, feeding yourself. Just like you would nourish a plant you want to see bloom and grow and transform and, bring fruit. You have to do the same for yourself. So what does that look like in this climate? It means doing things like engaging in activities that bring you joy. It's a very, very important aspect of self-care, especially in an atmosphere of discrimination and social upheaval, that you do things that bring joy. How do you do that? What are the things, ask yourself, what are the things that you love that gives you joy? Is it dance? Is it movement? Is it doing for family? Is it, creating beautiful things? Is it art? Is it culture? Those things, elements of culture that we engage in. Is that what brings you joy? I know for me particularly, with the onset of COVID-19 and us having been on lockdown, and even as a healthcare worker, initially when we were really on the, before we opened up the country, quote unquote, basically you couldn't go anywhere still. I mean, I went to take care of essential activities, went to work in my hospital and, got gas, got groceries and things of that nature. But all of the activities that I normally would do for self-care, external activities like going to do yoga class, going to my yoga classes, going to the gym, going to hike outdoors, I couldn't do any of those because all of that was shut down. And so I had to find and hone into the basics. And the basics for me, the things that brought me joy and brought me upliftment, is creativity. And that creativity was, fed by, and directed by my love of, home cooking, and home cooking with herbs and spices. And not just herbs and spices, but herbs and spices that infuse healing and nourishing at the same time. I'm one of those people that loves the aesthetic as well as function of things, and I see something particularly beautiful and uplifting and powerful in things, in activities, in elements of things that have a kind of duality where it's not just the aesthetics of a thing, but also it has a function as well. And I'm always drawn to that. So even when it comes to things like cooking, I really apply my teeth to that. And I really feel lifted up and embraced and nourished and hugged by the planet when I do that. When I put my hands in dirt, when I put my hands in the dirt, in the earth, and break off a piece of an herb that I am nourishing and I know will nourish me, when I put it in either a traditional dish from my home country, my home part of the world, or when it's some kind of fusion of dishes from all over the world. And for those who are curious about that, I recently started the Herby Home Chef. Created a page for that because I'll be on my YouTube channel, Freedom at the Crossroads. I have a segment now, a series that I've just started called the Herby Home Chef. And new videos will be uploaded every Friday going forward, featuring me shopping at basically like vlogs, shopping at my local farmers markets, the importance of shopping at farmers markets, organic foods, and just talking about the various spices and herbs that lend themselves to healing, not just in things like tinctures and infusions, but also when you include them and incorporate them into your dishes, as most of us who remember our ancestors remember that they used to do. I know that there's a particular herb that we use, a particular leaf that we use, for instance, in African cooking, particularly in Nigerian cooking, in the region of the country where I'm from, where we use what is called bitter leaf. But that bitter leaf also has medicinal and nutritional properties too. And traditionalists have known these for generations. And so it's interesting and fun and life affirming when I tap into that and hone into that. So for me, that is, a huge part of self-care for me. It has been, particularly during this time of, COVID-19 and shutdown and social distancing. Other things, what can you do? Get active in the community. There's something uplifting and empowering and transformational when you connect collectively with others with a similar goal and purpose to uplift, to dismantle injustice. And there's something empowering about doing that. So that's another element. That's another thing you can do in terms of self-care that, we don't necessarily think about, but it is self-care because it has the same motivation, the same roots. It's all about empowerment. It's all about transformation, and it's all about action. That is what is at the root of self-care. So these are just a few things that I just wanted to bring to the fore in honor of Juneteenth. I'll be talking more about this on the blog. Actually, there is a blog post going up later this weekend on Juneteenth and in honor of Juneteenth as well. You can go to my Instagram page, Tonyetaria Health. That's TonyetaRiah Health on Instagram. You can find me there. That's my other home there. The Undomesticated Woman podcast series also has a page there as well. And you can click on the link in my bio, and that will take you right there where you can catch up on all the latest episodes. But for now, ladies, thank you for sipping some tea with me on this Juneteenth, in remembrance of all of us, not just us women of the African diaspora, but women of color, in honor of people of color everywhere, in honor of anybody, any group of people who have been marginalized, discriminated against for any other reason other than being other. So this is Tonya from Freedom at the Crossroads, helping women everywhere look better, feel better without the pressure of OPE, other people's expectations. Next time.